What up? Mindbender Supreme, aka Malcolm Lovejoy, aka Goddess Worshipper #1 in Toronto. I love you. Professional Lovemaker Supreme. Please check out my website if you care to connect to me on a deeper level. Email me, phone me, text me. But otherwise, I'm just dropping a lesson for today. Another reading from Misogyny, the World's Oldest Prejudice. Wonderful, wonderful book. Jack Holland. You live on in my spirit, brother. Anyways, just dropping jewels. Let's go right into it. Misogyny and the Rise of Christianity. The rise of Christianity from an obscure sect to the world's dominant religion is a phenomenon unprecedented in human history. So too is the power and complexity of its misogynistic vision, which derives basically from three sources. From the Jews, the early Christians took the fall of man myth, as well as the notion of sin and a profound sense of shame. Later, from the Greeks, they borrowed the aspects of Plato's dualistic philosophy and Aristotle's scientific proofs of women's inherent inferiority, quote unquote. To this potent brew, Christianity itself contributed its central and unique tenet, that God had intervened in human history and in the body of the person of Jesus Christ to save mankind from death, sin, and suffering, and the evil effects of the fall from grace brought about by a woman named Eve. This is the story that is told. The Christians had inherited the Jewish attitude to history as a preordained unfolding of God's plan. The chosen church replaced the chosen people. Just as centuries later, Karl Marx would pass the mantle of historic determinism onto the shoulders of the chosen class. But no other religion before or since had been so audacious as to claim that God was a historical person, as real as Julius Caesar or Marilyn Monroe, and that salvation would come only to those who recognized him. It endowed Christian teaching with the power of divine revelation, supposedly. When backed by an aggressive, crusading, and omnipotent institution, it proved a lethal combination, especially to heretics and women. The bitterest irony in this is that during Christianity's first 3 centuries, women were a key to its remarkable success, thanks to the fact that it gave them a kind of liberation unheard of in the ancient world. The strain of Jewish misogyny had already had a long history by the time it was absorbed into Christian teachings, but it would have remained largely irrelevant to the rest of the world had it not been for the events of the mid-1st century AD concerning an obscure prophet named Jesus. What seemed like just another split within the always contentious ranks of Judaism attracted little attention at the time. Had there been headlines, there would have been claimed instead by the bloody fall of Sejanus, the Emperor Tiberius's favorite, and the resulting turmoil within the Roman ruling elite. What took place in Judea would not have been worth a soundbite. However, thanks to Christianity's extraordinary triumph over the ensuing centuries, a handful of proverbs and practices belonging to a small and politically insignificant nation have achieved almost universal status. The myth of creation as told in Genesis is now central to the belief of 2 billion Christians in 260 countries. That is, 1/3 of the world's populations haven't. Interesting times where technology decides to intervene and interrupt. Let me repeat. The myth of creation as told in the book of Genesis is now central to the belief of 2 billion Christians in 260 countries. That is, 1/3 of the world's population have inherited a myth that blames women for the ills and suffering of mankind. Unlike Greek misogyny, the Jewish version remained, as did the Jewish religion, at the level of proverb, parable, and practice. Instead of philosophy, the Jews had an extensive commentary and interpretation of the sacred texts, but the similarities in both the creation and fall of man myths are clear. As in the Greek myth, in the Jewish tradition, God creates the first man, Adam, as an autonomous being who lives happily, contented, and who lives a happy and contented existence in the Garden of Eden. His only communion is with the divine. Eve, like Pandora, is an afterthought. She is created from Adam's rib because God thought he required an help. And as with her Greek equivalent Pandora, Eve is disobedient, ignoring God's instructions not to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. The serpent did beguile me, and I did eat, Eve confesses rather nonchalantly in Genesis 3:13. The God of the Old Testament proves every bit as vindictive as Zeus. He tells Eve, "And I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and in thy sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be for thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." The message for Adam is clear. "And I shall put enmity between thee and woman," God tells him in what turns out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dastardly Christianity. The moral universe of Judaism differed profoundly from that of the classical world, in which, through Christianity, would deeply affect the development of misogyny. It was dominated by a sense of sin, a concept unknown to the neighboring Greeks and Romans. Zeus and his fellow divinities held gripes and grudges against individual mortals, but with the exception of the punishment inflicted on mankind for Prometheus's overwhelming ambition, rarely do they threaten to punish the world because of this or that violation. But Jehovah took offense easily, saw sin everywhere, and throughout much of the Old Testament sits in heaven with his finger, metaphorically, on the nuclear button. "And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them." His word was as good as its deed on at least one occasion, flooding the world and drowning the whole human race, save for Noah and his family, intending them to repopulate the world. Along with this sense of sin came a sense of shame of the human body, something completely alien to the world of the Greeks and the Romans. Think about that. Shame strikes at the very first consequence of Eve's transgression, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and that they sewed fig leaves together and made aprons. Passing from the Jewish tradition into Christianity, shame took a firm grip on human sexuality. To a surprising extent, it has not yet relinquished its hold. It gave misogyny a new and destructive dimension. 2,000 years later, here we are. Well, no. 1,800 years later, 1,700 years later, give or take a few centuries. So yeah, that's just a little something I was talking about today. Next it goes into homosexuality. We'll save that for another day, and how the Bible talked about that unsupportingly. But anyways, misogyny, unfortunately, has been here a long time. The Bible has helped people believe it. Science has helped people believe it. The government has helped people believe it. And society has helped people believe it. Don't believe the lies. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the evil. I love you. Spread love. Love the people around you. Don't blame them for sins. Don't blame them for your issues. And don't hurt them. It's pretty simple. I love you.